back to the warmth and connection, back to the life that had grown from conflict and crisis into something genuinely valuable. The diesel heater had heated my house, but the experience had warmed my life in ways no machine ever could. And that, I realized, was the real story worth telling. I never thought a 72-foot barn would become the hill I'd die on. But when Patricia Hendricks from the HOA sent me that certified letter demanding I tear it down, something inside me snapped. My name is Isaac Crawford, and I'd spent the better part of 6 months building that barn on my property in rural Montana, just outside Missoula. The structure was beautiful, functional, and according to every contractor I'd hired, completely within code. I'd purchased the land specifically because it was advertised as having minimal restrictions, a place where a man could finally breathe after spending 30 years in cramped suburban neighborhoods, where you needed permission to plant a damn rosebush. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late March. I was out feeding my horses when my wife, Deanna, came running across the field waving the envelope like it was on fire. "Isaac, you need to see this right now," she called out, her boots squelching in the mud. I took the letter from her hands, noting the return address, Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. My stomach dropped. When we'd bought this property 2 years ago, the real estate agent mentioned there was technically an HOA, but assured us it was dormant, just a formality from when the original developer had subdivided the land back in the 90s. The letter was 3 pages long, single-spaced, and dripping with legal jargon. The core message was simple. My barn exceeded the maximum structure height of 35 feet as outlined in the HOA covenants, and I had 30 days to either modify it or remove it entirely. 35 feet. I read aloud, my voice rising. "Deanna, that's absurd. This is agricultural land. Half the properties out here have silos taller than that." Deanna peered over my shoulder, her dark hair falling forward. "When did this HOA even become active again?" "We haven't paid dues or received any communications in 2 years. "Exactly," I said, marching back toward the house. "This is complete nonsense." I spent the rest of that afternoon on the phone. First, I called our real estate agent, Margaret, who seemed genuinely shocked by the news. She pulled up our original purchase documents and confirmed that while the HOA existed on paper, it had been inactive for over a decade. No board meetings, no dues collection, nothing. Next, I called my attorney, Bill Sanders, who'd handled our property closing. Bill was a gruff man in his 60s who didn't suffer fools gladly. "Let me get this straight," Bill said after I'd explained the situation. "You built a barn, fully permitted by the county, on land that was sold to you with the understanding that the HOA was defunct, and now some busybody is claiming you violated covenants that haven't been enforced in years." "That's exactly what I'm saying." "Did you receive any documentation about HOA restrictions before you started construction?" "Nothing. Not a word." Bill was quiet for a moment. "Here's the thing, Isaac. Even dormant HOAs can technically be revived if the proper procedures are followed. Someone must have filed paperwork to reactivate the board. I'll do some digging and find out what's going on. In the meantime, don't do anything to that barn. And whatever you do, don't respond to this letter without running it by me first." I hung up feeling marginally better, but the sense of violation lingered. Deanna and I had moved out here specifically to escape this kind of petty bureaucratic control. The barn wasn't some eyesore. It was a well-constructed post-frame building with cedar siding, designed to house our horses, hay storage, and my workshop. It was the culmination of a lifetime dream. That evening, I drove into town to grab supplies and decided to stop by the county clerk's office before they closed. The clerk, a pleasant woman named Susan, helped me search through recent filings. "Here it is," she said, turning her computer monitor toward me. "Meadowbrook Estates HOA reactivated February 1st of this year. Board president is listed as Patricia Hendricks. You have an address for her." Susan gave me a look. "You know I can't just give out personal information. It's public record if she's listed as the board president, isn't it?" She sighed and scribbled an address on a sticky note. "You didn't get this from me." Patricia Hendricks lived in a sprawling ranch-style home about 3 miles from my property. Her place was immaculate, with professionally landscaped grounds and a circular driveway. I pulled up around 6 in the evening and knocked on her front door. The woman who answered was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, blonde hair styled in that aggressive bob that seemed to be the uniform of suburban enforcers everywhere, and an expression that suggested I'd already committed a crime by breathing her air. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Patricia Hendricks. I'm Isaac Crawford. I received a letter from you today about my barn." Her face transformed into something resembling a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh yes, Mr. Crawford. I'm glad you're taking this matter seriously." "I'm taking it seriously because I'm confused. When I purchased my property, the HOA was inactive. I had no idea there were any restrictions. Ignorance of the covenants doesn't exempt you from following them," Patricia said, crossing her arms. "When you purchased property within Meadowbrook Estates, you automatically agreed to abide by all HOA rules and regulations. But nobody enforced those rules for over a decade. Previous board inaction doesn't invalidate the covenants. I took it upon myself to revive this HOA because our neighborhood was becoming an absolute disaster. Properties falling into disrepair, unsightly structures being erected. It was time someone took responsibility." I felt my jaw clench. "My barn is not unsightly. It's a professional-grade agricultural building, fully permitted by the county." "County permits have nothing to do with HOA compliance," Patricia said primly. "The covenant clearly states that no structure shall exceed 35 feet in height. Your barn is, according to my measurements, 72 feet tall. The peak of the roof might reach that height, but that's necessary for proper ventilation and storage capacity. It's a barn, not a house. The covenant doesn't distinguish between types of structures. A violation is a violation." Patricia pulled out her phone and began scrolling through photos. "I've documented several other violations throughout the neighborhood. Yours is simply the most egregious. So this isn't just about me. Of course not. I'm working to restore pride and property values to this entire community. You're welcome to attend our next board meeting if you'd like to discuss this matter further. It's scheduled for next Monday evening at 7, here at my home." I left Patricia's house feeling worse than when I'd arrived. This wasn't some misunderstanding that could be cleared up with a friendly conversation. This was a woman on a mission, and I was just the first target. Over the next few days, I learned more about Patricia's campaign. She'd managed to rally a small group of like-minded homeowners, mostly people who lived in the nicer, more suburban-style homes on the western edge of our development. They'd filed the paperwork to reactivate the HOA without notifying the majority of homeowners, which was apparently legal as long as they followed the procedures outlined in the original covenants. Bill called me on Friday with an update. "I've reviewed the covenants, and unfortunately, Patricia is technically correct about the height restriction. However, there are several potential defenses we can pursue. First, the doctrine of lashes, essentially arguing that the HOA waited too long to enforce the rule. Second, selective enforcement, if we can show they're targeting you while ignoring similar violations. Third, we might be able to argue that agricultural structures should be exempt based on the intended use of the land. What are our chances? In court, 50-50 at best. HOA law generally favors the associations, especially when the covenants are clearly written. But here's the thing, Isaac. Fighting this in court will cost you tens of thousands of dollars and take years. Even if you win, you'll have spent more than the barn is worth. So what are you suggesting? Go to that board meeting. Feel out the situation. Maybe there's a compromise to be reached, and in the meantime, let me do more research. There might be procedural issues with how they reactivated the HOA. Monday evening arrived cold and drizzly. Deanna offered to come with me for moral support, but I told her to stay home. I had a feeling this meeting was going to be contentious, and I didn't want her subjected to whatever nonsense Patricia had planned. 8 people were gathered in Patricia's living room when I arrived. I recognized a few neighbors, including Tom Peterson, who owned a small horse ranch similar to mine, and Carol Williams, whose property bordered the highway. The others were unfamiliar, though they all had that same pinched expression of people who'd found their calling in petty rule enforcement. Patricia called the meeting to order with all the formality of a Supreme Court hearing. She'd prepared an agenda, complete with printed copies for everyone, and launched into a lengthy discussion of her vision for the neighborhood. Property values have declined 17% over the past 5 years, she announced, displaying a chart on her laptop. This is directly attributable to the lack of standards and oversight. We need to restore order and ensure that Meadowbrook Estates becomes a desirable place to live again. Tom raised his hand. Patricia, most of us moved out here specifically because we wanted fewer restrictions. This is agricultural land. People have livestock, equipment, large buildings. That's the nature of the area. That's exactly the kind of attitude that's led to this decline, Patricia shot back. Just because something is common doesn't make it acceptable. We have covenants for a reason. The meeting dragged on for over an hour before Patricia finally addressed my situation. She displayed photos of my barn from multiple angles, each one annotated with measurements and citations to various sections of the HOA covenants. As you can see, Mr. Crawford's structure flagrantly violates our height restrictions, she said. I've sent him formal notice, and he has until April 23rd to bring his property into compliance. I stood up. Can I respond to this? Of course. The floor is yours. First, I want to state clearly that I had no knowledge these covenants were being enforced when I built my barn. I followed all county regulations, obtained proper permits, and constructed a building that's appropriate for the agricultural nature of my property. Second, I'd like to know why I'm being singled out. I've driven through this neighborhood, and I can count at least 6 other structures that appear to exceed 35 feet. Patricia's smile was razor thin. We're addressing violations in order of severity. Yours is the most obvious. That's selective enforcement, and it's not legal. We have limited resources, Mr. Crawford. We must prioritize. Carol Williams spoke up. I have a question. Patricia, you mentioned that your measurements show Isaac's barn at 72 feet. How exactly did you measure it? I used a digital measuring device from my property line. So you were on your own property when you measured, of course. I'm not going to trespass. Then your measurements can't be accurate. Measuring height from a distance, especially from a different elevation, introduces significant error margins. Patricia's face flushed. The violation is obvious to anyone with eyes. But is it actually 72 feet? Or is that number inflated to make your case seem stronger? The meeting dissolved into arguments after that. Tom and Carol questioned Patricia's motives and methodology, while her supporters accused them of trying to undermine community standards. I slipped out around 9 o'clock, exhausted and frustrated. Diana was waiting up when I got home. How bad was it? Worse than I expected. Patricia is absolutely determined to make an example out of me, but there are a few neighbors who are pushing back against her, so maybe there's hope. Over the next week, I received calls from several other homeowners who'd gotten violation notices from the HOA. Tom was being told his equipment shed was too close to the road. Carol's fence was apparently the wrong color. Another neighbor, Frank Morrison, was cited for having too many vehicles visible from the street, despite the fact that he ran a legitimate auto repair business from his property. We decided to organize. On the following Saturday, about 15 homeowners gathered at my barn, ironically, to discuss our options. The way I see it, Tom said, we have two choices. We can fight Patricia individually, which will be expensive and time-consuming, or we can fight her collectively. How do we do that? Asked Frank. We recall the board and elect new leadership. According to the covenants, any homeowner can petition for a special election if they get signatures from 30% of the properties. There are 43 parcels in Meadowbrook Estates, so we need 13 signatures, Carol nodded. I can get those signatures by the end of next week. Most people are fed up with Patricia's power trip. There's another option, I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. We could amend the covenants themselves. If we can get a majority vote, we could change or eliminate the height restriction entirely. That's brilliant, Deanna said. Then it doesn't matter who's on the board. The rule itself goes away. We spent the next 2 weeks collecting signatures and researching the process for amending HOA covenants. It turned out we needed a 2/3 vote of all homeowners to make changes, which meant we needed 29 properties to agree. Patricia didn't sit idle during this time. She ramped up her enforcement actions, sending out violation notices for increasingly petty infractions. One homeowner got cited for having grass that was 2 inches too tall. Another was told their mailbox was the wrong shade of brown. The backlash was swift and severe. More people joined our coalition, angry about Patricia's overreach. By early April, we had 32 homeowners ready to vote for amending the covenants. But then Patricia made her move. She filed a lawsuit against me in county court, seeking an injunction to force the immediate removal of my barn. The legal filing claimed I was causing irreparable harm to property values and creating a dangerous precedent of non-compliance. Bill was livid when he called to tell me. This is an intimidation tactic, pure and simple. She knows she's losing control, so she's trying to scare everyone into submission by going after you aggressively. Can she win? In the short term, maybe. A judge might grant a temporary injunction just to maintain the status quo while the case proceeds. But Isaac, here's what you need to understand. Once we're in court, you're looking at 6 months minimum before any final resolution, and that's if everything moves quickly. 6 months, at least. Discovery, depositions, motions, it all takes time. And every day this drags on, you're racking up legal fees. I sat down heavily, feeling the weight of the situation. What about our plan to amend the covenants? Would that make the lawsuit go away? It should. If the height restriction is eliminated before the judge issues a ruling, the case becomes moot. But you'd better move fast, because Patricia will do everything she can to slow down your amendment vote. We scheduled a special homeowners meeting for April 15th, giving everyone the required 2 weeks' notice. The agenda was simple. Vote on proposed amendments to eliminate the height restriction and clarify that agricultural structures were exempt from various other dimensional requirements. Patricia tried to block the meeting, claiming we hadn't followed proper procedures. She sent out her own letter to homeowners, filled with dire warnings about property values collapsing and the neighborhood descending into chaos if the amendments passed. She even hired a lawyer who sent Bill a cease and desist letter, though it had no legal standing. The night of the meeting arrived cool and clear. We'd reserved the community center in town because we expected a large turnout. I got there an hour early to set up chairs and prepare my presentation. Deanna had helped me create a slideshow explaining the proposed amendments and why they were necessary. People started arriving around 6:30. By 7 o'clock, every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. I counted at least 35 of the 43 homeowners present, plus various family members and even a few reporters from the local newspaper who'd gotten wind of the dispute. Patricia arrived fashionably late, flanked by her attorney and 2 other board members. She took a seat in the front row and spent the next few minutes whispering urgently with her lawyer. I called the meeting to order and explained the purpose. We're here tonight to vote on amendments to our HOA covenants. These amendments are designed to reflect the actual nature of our neighborhood, which is primarily agricultural, and to prevent the kind of arbitrary enforcement we've been experiencing. Patricia's hand shot up. Point of order. As board president, I should be running this meeting. This is a special meeting called by petition of the homeowners, Tom said, standing up. According to the bylaws, the petitioners may designate a moderator. We've chosen Isaac. Patricia's lawyer stood up. My client disputes the validity of this meeting. Proper procedures have not been followed, and we demand this gathering be disbanded immediately. Bill stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back. I'm Bill Sanders, representing Mr. Crawford and several other homeowners. I've reviewed the petition and the meeting notice. Everything is in perfect order. This meeting is entirely legitimate. We'll see what a judge has to say about that, Patricia's lawyer shot back. Feel free to file whatever motions you'd like, Bill replied calmly. In the meantime, these homeowners have the right to conduct their business. I proceeded with my presentation, explaining each proposed amendment and taking questions. Most people were supportive, though a few of Patricia's allies raised concerns about property values and neighborhood character. Carol spoke passionately about the need for flexibility. We didn't move to a cookie-cutter suburb. We chose this area because we wanted space to live our lives without someone measuring our grass with a ruler. These amendments protect our property rights while still maintaining reasonable standards. When it came time to vote, I distributed ballots to every property owner present. Those who couldn't attend had been given the option to submit proxy votes in advance, which we'd had notarized to prevent disputes. The counting took 20 minutes. When Tom finally announced the results, the room erupted in cheers. 31 properties had voted in favor of the amendments, 10 opposed, 2 abstained. Patricia stood up, her face crimson. This is a travesty. You've destroyed this neighborhood's character and decimated property values. I hope you're all happy when you can't sell your homes. Patricia, I said as calmly as I could manage, the people have spoken. This is democracy in action. This is mob rule, she spat back. And it's not over. My lawsuit proceeds regardless of this vote. Bill interjected. Actually, Patricia, with these amendments now passed, your lawsuit has no legal basis. The height restriction you're trying to enforce no longer exists. We'll see about that, she said, gathering her things and storming out, her lawyer and supporters trailing behind. I should have been elated. We'd won. The covenants were amended, my barn was legal, and Patricia's reign of terror was over. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't finished. I was right. 2 days later, I discovered that Patricia had filed complaints with the county building inspector, claiming my barn was structurally unsafe and built without proper permits. This was completely false. I had every permit and inspection certificate, but it triggered an automatic review process. The county inspector, a man named Rodriguez, came out the following Monday. He spent 3 hours examining every aspect of the barn, reviewing my permits and taking measurements. "Mr. Crawford," he said when he'd finished, "I don't know what complaints the county received, but this is one of the best-built structures I've seen in years. Everything is not just up to code, it exceeds it. Your permits are all in order, your inspections were properly completed. There's absolutely nothing wrong here. So the complaint was baseless, completely. I'll file my report saying as much, but between you and me, be careful. Whoever filed this complaint isn't going to stop. They're trying to cause you problems through any avenue they can." He was right. Over the next week, I received visits from the fire marshal investigating alleged safety violations, the health department responding to complaints about my horses, and even animal control claiming I was running an illegal breeding operation. Every single complaint was unfounded. Every inspector left shaking their heads at the waste of their time. But the harassment was taking its toll. Deanna was getting stressed, I was losing sleep, and we were both constantly on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Then Patricia escalated things in a way I never saw coming. I was in town one afternoon in early May when I got a frantic call from Deanna. "Isaac, you need to come home right now. The police are here." My heart dropped. "What? Why?" "Patricia filed a report claiming you threatened her. They want to talk to you." I broke about 15 speed limits getting home. 2 sheriff's deputies were standing in my driveway talking to Deanna. I parked and approached with my hands visible, trying to stay calm. "Are you Isaac Crawford?" one of the deputies asked. "Yes, sir. What's this about?" "We received a complaint that you made threatening statements toward a Patricia Hendricks." "Do you know Miss Hendricks?" "I do. She's the HOA president for our neighborhood. We've been in a dispute about my barn." "Did you threaten her?" "Absolutely not. I haven't even spoken to her in weeks, not since our homeowners meeting." The deputy consulted his notes. "Miss Hendricks claims you called her 2 nights ago and told her you'd make her regret pursuing legal action against you. She says you used aggressive language and made her fear for her safety." "That's completely false. I never called her. Check my phone records." The other deputy spoke up. "Do you have any witnesses who can verify your whereabouts 2 nights ago?" Diana stepped forward. "He was home with me all evening. We had dinner, watched a movie, and went to bed around 10. He never left the house, and I didn't hear him make any phone calls." The first deputy looked skeptical. "Madam, you're his wife. Of course you'd provide him an alibi." "It's not an alibi if he didn't do anything wrong," Deanna shot back. "This woman has been harassing us for months. She's filed false complaints with every county agency she can think of. This is just more of the same." I pulled out my phone. "Look, here's my call log. You can see every call I made in the past week. There's nothing to Patricia Hendricks." The deputy examined my phone. "This doesn't prove anything. You could have called from a different number or used a calling app." "But I didn't. This is a false accusation designed to harass me." After 20 minutes of questioning, the deputies finally left, saying they'd investigate further. I was shaking with anger and frustration. "She's trying to get you arrested," Deanna said, pacing the kitchen. "This is insane. We need to do something. Bill advised us to file a harassment complaint against Patricia. Document everything. Every false complaint, every baseless accusation, every interaction. We're building a case that she's engaging in targeted harassment." But before we could file anything, Patricia struck again. I woke up on a Thursday morning to find that someone had spray-painted "Scofflaw" across the side of my barn in huge red letters. Additionally, 3 of my fence posts had been cut. allowing two of my horses to wander onto the road. Thankfully, a neighbor spotted them and helped me get them back safely before anyone got hurt. This time, I called the sheriff's office myself. The same deputies came out, along with a detective named Lisa Morrison. "Mr. Crawford," Detective Morrison said after examining the damage, "I'm aware of your ongoing dispute with Miss Hendricks. This appears to be an escalation. Do you have any security cameras?" "No, I never thought I'd need them." "I'd suggest getting some. This kind of vandalism could become more serious." She took photos of the graffiti and the cut fence posts. "I'll speak with Miss Hendricks, but unless you have evidence linking her to this, there's not much I can do. Who else would have done it? She's the only person I'm in conflict with. Proving it is another matter." That afternoon, I drove into town and bought a complete security camera system. Deanna and I spent the weekend installing cameras covering every approach to our house and barn. If Patricia or anyone else tried something again, we'd have evidence. We didn't have to wait long. 3 nights later, around 2 in the morning, our security system's motion alert woke me up. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed. A figure dressed in dark clothing was approaching the barn, carrying what looked like a gas can. I called 911 immediately while Deanna pulled up the camera feed on her laptop to record what was happening. The figure circled the barn, apparently looking for the best place to start a fire. They were just beginning to pour liquid at the base of the barn when sheriff's vehicles came screaming up the driveway, lights flashing. The person tried to run but didn't get far. 3 deputies tackled them in the middle of my pasture. When they pulled off the hoodie, I was shocked. It wasn't Patricia. It was her son, Daniel Hendricks, a 28-year-old who still lived with his mother. Detective Morrison arrived shortly after and spent an hour questioning Daniel. With the video evidence and the gas can, there was no point in denying what he'd been doing. Daniel eventually admitted that his mother had been ranting about me for weeks, constantly talking about how I was ruining the neighborhood and needed to be stopped. "She didn't tell me to do this," Daniel insisted, "but she kept saying someone needed to teach you a lesson. I thought if your barn burned down, the whole problem would go away." "So you decided to commit arson?" Detective Morrison asked. "I just wanted to help my mom. She's been so stressed about all this." Daniel was arrested and charged with attempted arson, trespassing, and vandalism for the earlier graffiti, which he also admitted to. His bail was set at $50,000. I thought that would be the end of it. Patricia's son was facing serious criminal charges. The video evidence was indisputable, and surely she'd back off now. But I underestimated her capacity for denial and doubling down. The next day, Patricia showed up at my property unannounced. Deanna answered the door, and I could hear the shouting from my workshop. "This is your fault," Patricia screamed. "My son is in jail because of you and your illegal barn." "Your son tried to burn down my property," Deanna said firmly. "That's why he's in jail. You provoked this. You refused to follow the rules. You turned the neighborhood against me. You've destroyed everything." I came out of the workshop. "Patricia, you need to leave, now." "I'll leave when you admit what you've done. My son is a good boy. He's never been in trouble. You've ruined his life." "Your son made his own choices. He's an adult, and frankly, you should be more concerned about your own legal exposure." "What's that supposed to mean?" Detective Morrison, who'd been coordinating with us about the case, had mentioned that they were investigating whether Patricia had played a more direct role in the arson attempt. If Daniel's claim that she'd encouraged him held up, she could face charges as well. "It means you should probably talk to a lawyer instead of yelling at me." Patricia's face went through several shades of red. "This isn't over. I'll fight you until my last breath." "You need to leave my property," I said again, or I'll call the police." She left, but not before delivering a few more threats that I made sure to catch on my security cameras. 2 days later, I learned that Patricia had been arrested. The investigation into Daniel's attempted arson had uncovered text messages between mother and son. While Patricia hadn't explicitly ordered him to burn down my barn, she'd sent messages like, "Someone needs to solve this problem permanently. And I don't care what it takes. That barn needs to go." Prosecutors decided that while they couldn't prove she'd directly ordered the arson, her messages constituted solicitation and conspiracy. She was charged with conspiracy to commit arson and released on bail. The local newspaper covered the story extensively. HOA president arrested in barn arson plot ran as the front page headline. The article detailed Patricia's campaign of harassment, the false complaints, and ultimately her son's arrest and her own charges. The remaining HOA board members immediately distanced themselves from Patricia. 2 of them resigned outright, while the third called an emergency meeting to remove Patricia as president and dissolve the reactivated board entirely. But the legal system moved slowly. Daniel's trial was scheduled for September, while Patricia's case wouldn't go to trial until November at the earliest. In the meantime, both of them were out on bail, and I remained constantly vigilant, worried about retaliation. Bill suggested I file a civil lawsuit against both Patricia and Daniel for damages, harassment, and emotional distress. "You've got them dead to rights," he said. "The criminal cases will help establish liability. You could recover significant damages, enough to cover all your legal fees and then some." I was hesitant about going down that road. Part of me just wanted this whole nightmare to be over. But Diana convinced me that holding them accountable was important, not just for us but to deter Patricia from targeting anyone else. We filed the civil suit in June. The complaint detailed every false complaint, every baseless accusation, the vandalism, the attempted arson, and the emotional toll it had all taken. We sought compensatory damages of $100,000 plus legal fees. Patricia's attorney tried to get the case dismissed, arguing that HOA enforcement actions were protected activity and that we couldn't prove Patricia had directly participated in any crimes. The judge denied the motion, ruling that there was sufficient evidence to proceed. Summer passed in a blur of depositions and legal proceedings. Daniel's criminal trial came first. The video evidence was damning and he'd already confessed. His attorney tried to argue that he'd been manipulated by his mother, that he had mental health issues, that he'd never intended to actually start a fire. None of it worked. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Daniel to 5 years in prison, though he'd be eligible for parole after 18 months. He also ordered Daniel to pay restitution for the vandalism and the cost of my security system. Patricia's trial began in mid-November. The prosecution's case was more complicated than Daniel's had been. They had to prove that Patricia's words and actions constituted criminal conspiracy, which required showing that she'd intended for Daniel to commit arson. I testified about Patricia's harassment campaign, the false complaints, and her aggressive behavior. Deanna testified about Patricia's threats and erratic conduct. Detective Morrison presented the text messages and explained how the investigation had uncovered a pattern of escalating behavior. Patricia's attorney argued that she'd been expressing frustration, not ordering criminal acts. He portrayed her as a well-meaning community volunteer who'd been pushed to the breaking point by my refusal to comply with HOA rules. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, they'd found Patricia guilty of conspiracy to commit arson, but acquitted her of solicitation charges. The judge scheduled sentencing for January. Our civil trial was scheduled for February, but Patricia's attorney approached Bill about settling. With both criminal convictions on record, they knew they had no real defense. After 2 weeks of negotiations, we reached a settlement. Patricia would pay $75,000 in damages and legal fees, and she'd sign a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from contacting us or coming within 500 feet of our property. Patricia's criminal sentencing happened on a cold January morning. Deanna and I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Patricia looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her actions. The prosecutor recommended 2 years in prison. Patricia's attorney argued for probation, citing her lack of prior criminal history and her mental state. The judge wasn't sympathetic. "Miss Hendricks, you embarked on a campaign of harassment that ultimately led to your son attempting to destroy your neighbor's property. While I don't believe you explicitly ordered the arson, your conduct created an environment where your son felt justified in taking such extreme action. You abused your position of authority in the HOA to bully and intimidate people. This court cannot condone such behavior." He sentenced Patricia to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She'd also be required to attend anger management counseling and perform community service. As the bailiff led Patricia away, she looked back at me one last time. There was no anger in her expression now, just exhaustion and defeat. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Justice had been served, but also sadness at how completely this had spiraled out of control. All of this, all the legal battles and criminal charges and lives disrupted, because one person couldn't accept that not everyone wanted to live under her rules. Spring came early to Montana that year. The snow melted by mid-March, and the fields turned green with new growth. My barn stood tall and proud, the graffiti long since cleaned away, a monument to the principle that sometimes you have to stand your ground. But I hadn't forgotten Patricia's initial complaint, her insistence that my barn was too tall, her determination to make me comply with her arbitrary rules. And I hadn't forgotten my rights as a property owner, now protected by our amended covenants, so when Tom called me in April asking if I wanted to go in together on a grain silo, I didn't hesitate. "How tall are you thinking?" I asked. "Well, the standard commercial models are about 80 feet. Would give us plenty of storage for hay and feed." "Let's do 90 feet, I said. "Just to make a point." Tom laughed. "I like the way you think." We broke ground on the silo in May. It was a beautiful structure, gleaming metal reaching high into the Montana sky. We positioned it right on the property line between our 2 parcels, visible from the road, impossible to miss. When the construction crew finished in July, Tom and I stood admiring their work. The silo towered over everything else in the area, a gleaming middle finger to arbitrary rules and petty tyrants. "Think Patricia can see it from prison?" Tom asked. "I hope so," I replied, but we weren't quite done. In August, I decided to build a second barn. This one would be smaller than the original, just 60 feet tall, designed to house equipment and provide additional workshop space. I positioned it on the opposite side of my property, creating a skyline of agricultural structures that would have given Patricia an aneurysm. When the county inspector came out to review the permits, he looked at my plans and grinned. "You're really leaning into this, aren't you? Just exercising my property rights," I said innocently. "Well, everything's in order. Build whatever you want." The second barn went up quickly. By September, I had 2 barns and part ownership of a 90-foot grain silo. My property looked like a working ranch should look, functional and unapologetic. Frank Morrison, the neighbor who ran the auto repair business, decided to build a new garage for his business. He made it 70 feet tall, with huge doors and a lift system for working on trucks and RVs. Carol expanded her horse facilities, adding a covered arena that peaked at 65 feet. Our little section of Meadowbrook Estates transformed into exactly what it should have been all along. A community of people living their lives, running their businesses, and using their properties as they saw fit. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story in October titled, "Community Thrives After HOA Controversy." The reporter interviewed several of us about the changes we'd made and our feelings about the whole ordeal. "I think we learned an important lesson," I told the reporter. HOAs can serve a purpose in the right context, but when they are used as tools for control and harassment, they do more harm than good. We're fortunate that our community came together to take back our rights. Tom added, "Property ownership means something. It means having the freedom to use your land in reasonable ways without someone measuring your fence posts and counting your trucks." The article ran with photos of our properties, including beautiful shots of my 2 barns and our grain silo silhouetted against a sunset. It got picked up by several larger newspapers and even went semi-viral on social media. We started getting calls from people in other states dealing with similar HOA disputes, asking for advice. Bill suggested we write a guide about challenging HOA overreach. "You've got a compelling story and practical experience. Could help a lot of people." Deanna loved the idea. She spent the fall compiling all our documents, legal research, and lessons learned into a comprehensive guide. We published it online as a free resource, and within a month it had been downloaded over 10,000 times. Patricia was released from prison in June of the following year, having served her full 18 months. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Idaho to live with a sister, unable to face the community she'd alienated. Her house sold in August, well below market value. The new owners were a young couple with 2 kids who were thrilled to be in an area with minimal restrictions. Daniel was released on parole that September. Tom ran into him at a gas station in Missoula and reported that he seemed genuinely remorseful about what he'd done. He'd enrolled in community college and was trying to rebuild his life. I had no desire to reconnect with him, but I hoped he'd learned something from the experience. As for me and Deanna, we settled into the life we'd always wanted. My horses were happy. My workshop was everything I'd dreamed of. And every morning I walked out to feed the animals and saw those 2 barns standing proud against the Montana sky. People sometimes asked if I regretted how everything played out, if I wished I'd just compromised with Patricia from the beginning and avoided all the conflict. The answer was always no. What Patricia was doing wasn't about barn height or property values. It was about control, about imposing her will on others, about making people submit to her authority. Compromising would have just emboldened her to continue targeting others. By standing firm, by rallying the community, by fighting back through legal means, we'd accomplished something important. We'd protected not just my property rights, but everyone's. We'd shown that bullies, even ones hiding behind the veneer of official authority, can be stopped. The second barn became my favorite of the 2. It was smaller but more personal, designed exactly to my specifications. I spent most evenings there, working on various projects, listening to music, enjoying the space I'd created. The fact that it existed largely because Patricia had tried to take down my first barn made it even more satisfying. Tom and I used the grain silo for its intended purpose, storing hay and grain for our livestock. But it also served as a reminder, a monument to the principle that rights defended are rights preserved. 3 years after the whole mess began, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA was formally dissolved. The remaining homeowners voted unanimously to abandon the association structure entirely. The covenants were eliminated, replaced by simple mutual easement agreements for the shared road maintenance. We threw a party to celebrate, gathering at my property with barbecue and beer and live music. 40 people showed up, including most of our neighbors and several of the reporters who'd covered the story. Even Rodriguez, the county inspector, stopped by. As the sun set and the party wound down, I stood with Diana looking at my 2 barns, silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Do you think Patricia ever understood what she did wrong?" Diana asked. "Probably not," I said. "People like that rarely do. They're so convinced of their righteousness that they can't see how their actions affect others." "You think she ever thinks about us?" "Maybe. But I don't think about her anymore. This is our home, our land, our life. She's just a bad memory now." Deanna leaned against me. "I'm glad you built the second barn, me too. Best decision I ever made." "Well, second best. Marrying me was the first." I laughed and pulled her close. "Obviously." The stars came out one by one, brilliant in the clear Montana sky. Somewhere in the darkness, my horses were settling in for the night, safe in their barn. The barn that was too tall, according to someone who tried to dictate how I could use my own property. The barn that had sparked a war I'd never wanted but had ultimately won. And its companion, the second barn, built as a statement that no one would ever push me around again. I'd come to Montana looking for freedom and space. I'd found both, but I'd also learned that sometimes you have to fight to keep them. The fight had been exhausting, expensive, and occasionally scary. But standing there under the stars, looking at what I'd built and defended, I knew it had